Why is it that only one kind of person truly makes it out of a narcissistic relationship with their soul intact? And why is that survivor almost never the person you expect? The loud, fiery personalities who fight back often burn out first. The ones with rigid boundaries tend to walk away before the real transformation ever begins. Carl Jung believed that our unconscious leads us into experiences long before the logical mind can interpret them, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the way a narcissist selects their partner. They don't choose at random. They're drawn to a very specific nervous system, a history coded into the body, a subtle emotional signature that feels familiar to their pathology. And yet the person who survives them is not the strongest, not the most self-aware, not even the one who seems emotionally intelligent on the surface. The survivor is the one who carries a hidden alchemy, the ability to take psychological poison and slowly, painfully, transmute it into clarity, identity, and power. Picture the beginning. Not the chaos, the enchantment. The intensity that feels like destiny. The warmth that feels like home. The narcissist never enters as a storm. They arrive as a mirror. They reflect back your goodness, your empathy, your compassion, and your longing to finally be seen. They study your pauses, your voice, your reactions. What they're searching for is not beauty or strength or status. They're scanning for endurance. They're looking for the person who has practiced holding discomfort since childhood, the one who learned early on that love is something you stabilize, manage, and maintain at any cost. That endurance becomes their doorway into your life, and eventually, the key to your escape. You didn't present yourself as wounded. You presented yourself as steady, understanding, emotionally attuned. Jung wrote that our unconscious leaks through our gestures and tone in ways we don't perceive. To healthy people, your warmth reads as compassion. To a narcissist, it reads as training. They see a child who learned to anticipate moods, to soothe chaos, to protect fragile adults. You grew up reading emotional weather patterns the way sailors read storm clouds. You adapted not by fighting or fleeing but by absorbing, smoothing, softening. In psychology, we now understand this as a fawn response, a survival pattern where safety is earned through emotional caretaking. That capacity once saved you. In adulthood, it makes you a magnet for the person who needs a place to hide from their own disorder. A moment that seems insignificant to others becomes a signal to them. A sharp tone from a stranger. A dismissive comment from a date. Most people recoil. You interpret. You rationalize. You shift your energy to calm the environment. You turn toward the problem instead of away from it. To a narcissist, this is confirmation. They see that you will carry what they refuse to feel. They sense that your compassion is elastic, stretchable, bendable, capable of holding their rage, their shame, their emptiness. In their world, that doesn't look like love. It looks like opportunity. And yet, what they never understand is this. The same endurance that makes you usable is the very endurance that makes you unbreakable. You are not weak for surviving. You are tempered, hardened, seasoned by years of learning how to hold what should never have been yours to hold. What they mistake for submission is actually resilience under sedation, a strength lying dormant, waiting for awareness to awaken it. That awakening does not begin with anger. It begins with recognition. Jung described the imago, the inner template of love we inherit from our earliest bonds. If love once meant unpredictability, anxiety, or emotional distance, the nervous system wires that experience into familiarity. So when the narcissist recreates that rhythm of closeness, withdrawal, reward, and deprivation, your body doesn't interpret it as danger. It interprets it as home. Not consciously, biologically. The cycle becomes addictive, driven by bursts of dopamine and cortisol that mimic the emotional volatility of your past. It feels intense because it is familiar, not because it is profound. This is the trap most people never escape. The relationship becomes less about the person in front of you and more about the unfinished story inside you. Jung called this the compulsion to repeat, the unconscious attempt to repair an old wound by reenacting it. You don't stay because you want the narcissist. You stay because you want resolution. You want the unavailable person to finally become available. You want the cold figure to finally warm. You want the ending you were once denied. But something shifts when the nervous system grows tired of the same loop. It doesn't happen during a fight. It rarely happens during chaos. It arrives in stillness. A quiet car ride. A silent dinner table. A morning where you look at them and feel nothing. Not fear. Not longing. Just an immense, bone-deep exhaustion. It is the psyche refusing to keep performing a role it has outgrown. Jung believed that before we become who we truly are, the false self must collapse. In narcissistic relationships, this collapse is slow and internal. The part of you that once ran toward conflict to stabilize it simply stops running. The survival instinct that once worked overtime on their behalf begins, almost imperceptibly, to turn toward you. You start noticing the pattern instead of reacting to it. You watch the manipulation rather than drowning inside it. You detach, not in defiance, but in clarity. To the narcissist, this detachment feels like betrayal, because they never understood that your emotional engagement was a gift, not a default state. They depended on your reactions to regulate their identity. Your tears, your explanations, your anxiety, all of it functioned as psychological fuel. Positive attention fed their ego. Negative attention fed their control. But when you stop reacting, when you shift into neutrality, the supply disappears. They are left alone with the internal emptiness they have avoided their entire life. And that is where the breakup truly begins. Silence is misunderstood. People assume silence is weakness or retreat. But in this kind of relationship, silence is transformation. Silence is the moment you stop offering your inner world for dissection. It is the refusal to provide more information for them to twist, weaponize, or reinterpret. It is a boundary that exists without performance. Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of the psyche we refuse to confront. The narcissist uses you to avoid theirs. Your silence forces them into that confrontation. They panic. They cycle through charm, guilt, anger, nostalgia, and intimidation. They reach for every lever that once controlled you. But you are no longer positioned inside the pattern, you are observing it from above. The survivor is not cold. The survivor is conscious. Your neutrality is not indifference. It is sovereignty. This is the turning point most never reach. Long before you leave physically, you leave psychologically. The breakup unfolds inside months before it exists outside. You withdraw your emotional investment thread by thread, memory by memory, expectation by expectation. You mourn the fantasy. You grieve the potential. You bury the version of them that never really existed. By the time you walk out the door, you are not leaving in anger, you are completing a transformation. To the narcissist, this feels catastrophic. They do not perceive you as separate. They experience your departure not as loss, but as self-amputation. They cannot comprehend that the person they assumed would forever orbit their gravity has become a free-standing world of their own. They mistake your endurance for dependence. They mistake your patience for submission. They never realize that your silence was not surrender, it was separation. But survival does not end with leaving. That is only the doorway. The weeks after are dangerous in a different way. The brain softens painful memories and highlights the good ones. You remember the tenderness, the laughter, the early enchantment. You forget the dread, the instability, the erosion of self. You feel a gravitational pull backward, not toward love, but toward familiarity. The narcissist senses this and sends subtle signals, pings, to see if they still have access to your attention. A message. A memory. A sentimental breadcrumb. The survivor understands that responding revives the entire cycle. The survivor also understands something deeper. Closure is not granted by the person who hurt you. Closure is internal. Closure is the moment you stop asking them to validate what you lived through. Closure is choosing your own reality over their narrative. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming your truest self, often emerges from profound psychological crisis. The narcissistic relationship feels like destruction, but for this one type of person, it becomes metamorphosis. You do not escape unchanged. You emerge refined. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer mistake chaos for connection. You begin to guard your empathy with discernment. You discover that compassion without boundaries is not virtue, it is self-abandonment. And that is why only one kind of person survives a narcissist. Not the strongest. Not the most confident. Not the most guarded. The survivor is the one who has the courage to face their own unconscious, to see the pattern not as punishment but as revelation, to stop reenacting an old wound and instead integrate it. The survivor is the person who was conditioned to carry the unbearable, and then one day chose to set it down. The survivor is not defined by what happened to them, but by who they became in the aftermath. The narcissist remains trapped in repetition, eternally fleeing their inner world. But you, the survivor, step into yours. You reclaim your voice, your intuition, your agency. You realize that you were never chosen because you were weak. You were chosen because you were powerful, and now you know it. You were never meant to spend your life surviving someone else's emptiness. You were meant to build a life where love does not require self-erasure, where safety is not earned through endurance, where connection does not feel like tension. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The narcissist feels like fate, until you awaken. And when you awaken, you do not just survive them. You outgrow them. If this story echoes your own, if something inside you recognized itself in these words, stay with this journey. Because the trait that once made you a target is the same quality that now makes you unstoppable, the capacity to transform what was meant to break you into the very thing that sets you free.